it means so much to me that you took time to jump on for our inspiration hour. I
Not at
recently
all.
saw you on Mad Money, and I was so blown away that you start your day with meetings in Europe and end in Australia. So
Right. It's good to go across the world.
it really is. But you taking the time really showcases your commitment to small business owners and women business owners. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and as Rise went from in-person programming to all this fun virtual, and
Yep,
started,
it's a feature, not a bug.
yeah, exactly. You know, we started thinking about what's important to us and how do we want to shape this, you know, this new fun time for us. And one of our core values is living by the quote, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." You know, it really changes how you feel. And so we thought it was really important that we took time to talk to women like yourself. And you know, I know in my darkest days, having these kind of moments and conversations would leave me so charged up and ready to get back out there and take on the world. So we want to make sure we had that opportunity for more people. So thank you.
Cool. It's my
Yeah,
pleasure. I'm really happy to be here.
good. One of the other core value we have and something we believe in is creating a pipeline for success for young women. And so much so that we like to start our interviews a little bit different. We don't start with a bios, which is very impressive. You have a very impressive bio. We think it's fun to take it back to the high school days and think about who you were then versus who you are now. So I'd love for you to start sharing, you know, what your first job was in high school, or what you thought you wanted to be in high school, and then what you're doing now.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Stacy. And thanks to everyone who might be listening along. First of all, thinking of you all. Clearly, really, really tough times out there. I think everyone's experiencing this phenomenal new kind of norm that we're living in. My hearts go out to all the first responders. I just want to say that first and foremost, people who are really on the front lines. My brother happens to be an ICU doctor back in the UK, and so I check in with him every morning. And it really helps put my life in perspective. And frankly, it gives me so much gratitude for the work that's happening out there. Stacy, I'll answer your question. First job, we talked about this before, actually. So first true job was working on my uncle's farm. He used to make us get up first thing in the morning during the summers and go collect stones off the mountain. How's that for a job?
Yeah.
Which was really his way of clearing a field to take it from being a mountainous field to making it arable. My first real job that I got paid for, that I was excited about when I was 16, 17, was waitressing. And I think so many people get their first job in the service industry because it's just a classic place that hires a lot of young people. And it teaches you so much about putting the customer first, always. It teaches you how to always stick a smile on your face no matter what's going on, even when that plate is burning your hand off. And I was so grateful for it because it was my way of getting the pocket money that allowed me to go out with my girlfriends at the weekend, which is incredibly important when you're a teenager. But it was a great entree into the world of work. It also told me I wanted to work really hard in school because I knew that I was not going to be a successful waitress. I was not good at that job.
Yeah, you and me both. I did the same. I feel like everyone needs to do retail and restaurant. They teach you a lot, and they are really critical, and I'm feeling for them right now. And so I'm excited for them to get back out there. Now, currently, share, in case someone doesn't know what you're up to currently.
Yeah, so right now, so I'm the CEO of Nextdoor. Hopefully everybody is utilizing Nextdoor and understand, and in some ways I feel like I have to say less the purpose of Nextdoor these days, but Nextdoor's purpose is to cultivate a kinder world where everyone has a neighborhood to rely on. And I often find myself then explaining how, you know, in life we often have friend networks, that we have professional networks, but just how much we all at Nextdoor believe in this power of proximity and power of community. I don't think I actually really need to say that in today's world. I think everyone is understanding the power of their neighborhood. So what we see happening across Nextdoor at the moment, it's been unprecedented for us. So the team is working 24/7 right now to make sure the platform stays alive and up because we need to be there for our neighbors. We see people checking in on elderly neighbors, anyone who might be vulnerable. I ran and got a prescription for someone this weekend at Costco because she has a lung problem and is immunosuppressed, so she couldn't leave her house. We see lots of volunteer hands going up. In fact, we launched something called Help Map a few weeks ago now, and it's a wonderful way to see people actually put their hand up to help. We actually didn't want to put the help wanted on it, because by the way, the last thing you want to do, and it's a good thing to think about when you design products, is you don't want to put a map of the vulnerable, because even in these unprecedented times, there still will be people who maybe aren't always out for the best in life. But with that, because even in these unprecedented times, there still will be people who maybe aren't always out for the best in life. But with that, because even in these unprecedented times, there still will. Okay,
all
sorry.
right. We got to hear that twice. Great message.
Just make sure I hadn't cussed. I was like, wow, I hear myself. It's not just that normal little inner voice that never goes away, but that really is me speaking. So you want to make sure you're not. Yeah, maps of the vulnerable. And then the other thing that we see going on in Nextdoor is clearly people really helping both from a public agency perspective. So that's why I started there, because I wake up every morning to a post from our local Health and Human Services department about what to know about in our community. Of course, the CDC is always there, and one of our goals is always to make sure you have the most accurate and the most real-time information in a situation that's moving quite quickly. And then finally, small businesses, which is, of course, your bread and butter and what we all care passionately about. And I am just uplifted and then terrified by what I hear and see around small businesses right now. I'm uplifted because I see so many neighbors saying, how do I make sure my local coffee shop stays in business? Or how do I make sure that restaurant that I love dearly will be here on the other side? So we see people buying gift cards, we see people doing takeout and delivery, even just doing plain old like GoFundMe or donation pages. On the other side, as I've talked to small businesses, it is gruesome out there, and just finding them a playbook of what to do. You need to move fast. Like I talked to one of my favorites, Helen Russell at Equator Coffee last week. Clearly owns a lot of coffee shops in the QSR business. And I think the big learnings for her were move as fast as you can, start thinking about conserving cash flow right away. All these other things are good and well for things, but you've got to triage first, stop the bleeding, and then figure out how you get to the other side. One of my board members called it, you got to carry water through the desert. And so I'm thinking about that for our business as well.
Oh, I love that. And you're right. I mean, it has been such an interesting time of highs and lows. I'm right there with you. My members, when we had to shut our doors, I could start crying how supportive and wonderful they were. So it's been such an interesting time to have such different emotions happening all at the same time. Yeah. And so speaking of small businesses and just the way things evolve and change so quickly, I'm curious, as you've progressed in your career, how your definition of success has changed. I think these kind of times really make you turn inward and think about what's important in life, and maybe some of the external things that we thought meant success sometimes don't mean that anymore to us. So how has your definition changed?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because to me, I've seen an arc in my career, and clearly we tell our histories backwards. So we kind of make sometimes the story fit the outcome. But I would definitely start, I'll lay a little seed and I'm going to come back to it. But, I grew up in Northern Ireland. I think you know that. I grew up in a really small community, as you can tell, since my first job was picking stones off a mountain. But I grew up with parents that were incredibly community-minded and service-minded. My mom was the local nurse. She was actually the midwife, so she birthed kind of half the village. And my dad was the personnel manager, and they kind of definitely instilled in me that, you had to, a big part of just success in your life was looking out for other people and making communities stronger. But then spin that forward, then I got into my 20s, and you're just hardcore charging at career, right? Yeah. And I think one of the things in the beginning of career you get very caught up on are things like titles and salary and, brand names that you work for. And it can feel like you're almost in a checklist sort of mode. And I have that in me. Like I love me a checklist. Let me tell you, it's how I operate. And I feel like I did a lot of that even just with my life and my career. And it in hindsight now, I feel it boxed me in a lot. So I think when you get very focused on that, you get afraid to take risks, frankly. And you can find yourself, yes, you've checklisted, everything's done, but do you feel completely fulfilled? Right. And so probably one of my favorite books that I read a year ago is a book called Ikigai. I'm sure I'm butchering the name, but it's kind of a Japanese convention, Ikigai. And Ikigai has this idea of 4 overlapping circles, that when you think about your life, there's what you're good at, there's what you love, there's what you're paid for, and then what the world needs. And it's such an interesting four things. So of course if you do what you love and you do what you're good at, that tends to be a passion in life. If you do what you love and it's what the world needs, that can be a mission in life. If you do what you're good at and you get paid for it, that's a profession. If I think about my brother or my mom in the services industries, right, like the medical services, if you do what you're paid for and what the world needs, that's a vocation. But Ikigai's whole point is, how do you get into the middle of those four overlapping circles? So you find a place where passion, mission, profession, and vocation all come together. And so that's kind of why I started by saying, in learning about community so early in my life, I feel incredibly gifted to come back to a place in my life where I do feel much more centered, because I feel like what I'm working on has purpose in the world. It needs it. The world needs more community. It needs a way for people to be able to make just those strong, weak ties, is how psychologists describe it. It's something I personally love. So like when I hop out of bed in the morning, I'm not low energy at all. It is something I'm good at, because I know at operating and growing companies, and I do get paid for it. It is a job as well. And I don't want to sound like I am holier than thou. Like in the end, I also want to do things for my family. The pay thing has become less important at this stage in my career, but that's because I'm lucky. I'm totally lucky, totally privileged. But I do think that throughout my career, when I kind of diminished the comp piece and kind of said, if I do the thing I love and I'm passionate about, the comp will come, that was also a good unlock. Now, I don't like to say that totally to particularly a women audience, because women are really bad at talking about compensation and asking for it. So that is not what I'm saying. You should get paid well for what you are doing, right, but you shouldn't make that the decision factor in the what you do. So that might give people a little bit of a different way to think about the world. And the book is just called Ikigai. It's super short, and just, I think, a good book to read for these moments of time.
And I think that's great advice, but I think about the 22-year-olds. We have a 22-year-old Lindsay who's a new hire, and I can think about myself back in that day. And I would read stuff like that, and for some, it would feel so paralyzing, right? Because in theory, that sounds great, but what does that actually look like? And I think that those young people, when they hear that advice, sometimes they put a lot of pressure on that I got to figure out that, where those circles all overlap immediately. And it takes time. So how are you able to do that through the years to be able to accomplish that? Because it's not, often it's not a linear process, right? And I think so often people have paradox of choice, and they paralyze because they're like, I have to make sure I get right dab in that middle of those circles. How do I do it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for a start, I think you have to be explicit about it. So for many of us, we're too busy, right? Just life takes over and we're running. And we may take a lot of time on, say, a strategic project at work, or a lot of time to plan a wedding. I'm just like thinking of the things that you spend time on. But like, how often do people just take a step back and really think about their career? And so one of my mentors back in my kind of probably late 20s timeframe suggested, it was really around mentoring, the conversation, but then it became a bigger conversation about career planning. Her advice was to make sure that at the end of every quarter, because we happened to work in a business that was very quarterized, that I would sit down and look at who I thought my 3 or 4 mentors were. And she talked a lot about this concept of a board of directors, which I've not seen many people write about. But who are your kind of key mentors? And have you explicitly reached out and talked to them in that 90-day period that's just gone by? And what was the question that you were asking? And then when you got the answer, did you work on it? And she definitely was a great believer in setting aside time, whether it was, just saying, this Friday morning, I'm actually not going to work on the work. I'm going to work on the work that is me, and be really explicit about it and treat it the way you would treat a work project, and write it down. And I feel like that started to give me a stronger sense of direction. So instead of just letting the world happen to me, I felt a much more like I was in a mode of figuring out where did my career need to go and what was going to give me that moment of inspiration. Now, push the whole way forward, because I spent a long period of my career working on Wall Street. Towards the end, I knew very explicitly I didn't want to do that anymore. And I gave myself permission. Actually, said, I'm going to hang up my, whatever you hang up when you're done with that job, hang up my stirrups. I don't know what the phrase is. But I am going to take time to think about my next move. And I think even in that period of kind of a 4 or 5 month kind of grace period, it allowed me to go back to first principles. I didn't know the concept of Ikigai at the time, but it was the first principles of certainly what gives me joy and what am I good at. And recognizing that I kept wanting to go to jobs. I was like, but I'm really good at being a financial analyst. And it turned out, no, the things I was good at is I'm very good at data analysis, and that can be done in many jobs, not just the financials industry. I'm a good communicator. I actually love to travel, which most people don't think about when they think about like their job. I'm really, really interested in people. And so when I started to kind of boil out what I would call the first principles, I think that got me to a better place from a career perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. And super helpful to share. And something else that I think is really helpful to share when talking to women like you, because it's so easy to look at someone like you that's accomplished so much and feel like it's so unattainable that you're so different. And so I think it's really helpful to take it on back and share a mistake or a failure that's really shaped you along the way, help humanize you.
Don't worry, there's plenty of them. And now that I get to work from home every day, I've got 2 kids out there that'd be happy to enumerate all the many mistakes that I have managed to accomplish just even today. One of the biggest ones that I have talked about publicly, because it was a huge deal, is if I go back to that Wall Street career, right, I was in the checklist mode, what I talked about. I'd done all the right things, and I got all the way to the point where I really wanted to make partner at the company I was at. I was at Goldman Sachs. And the partnership was a really, really big deal. It was kind of the pinnacle of what you strove for the minute you walk through the door. And all the indications were great. And I felt like I was doing all the right things. I was not only just like killing it at my job, but I was, doing the female thing. I was like handling all the diversity and inclusion stuff, you name it, I was on top of it. And I remember getting the phone call on like an early morning, because I worked on the West Coast, but I worked market hours. So it was probably like 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. From someone saying, it's not your year, and partnership is every 2 years. So it's almost like, oh my God, it's not even just my year, it's not my 2 years. And it felt so, it was like just an incredible moment of like the thing that I thought was going to happen to begin with, which was the worst thing is when you get surprised negatively. It had been the single thing that I had been striving for probably like a decade of my career. So it felt really defining. And so when it didn't happen, I felt really kind of cut loose, like undefined. Yeah. I felt a deep sense of failure. Like, what could I have done? What should I have done? I definitely had a huge emotional reaction just even in the moment. Like I called my husband, my kind of support system, and he said, leave the building. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, walk out right now. I was like, you mean like for good? And he's like, no, just like walk downstairs and go outside. I'll come meet you. And it was such the right advice, because I was going through all of the emotions of grief in like split second, from, the grief to the despondency to the anger. Like I had all of those emotions, and I probably wasn't about to make any good decisions. And his advice, is to clear the building. And I remember us walking around in kind of the beginning light of dawn in San Francisco, walking around this building with me swearing, like every other word that came out was a swear word, because I'm Irish. It's often how we cope with stress. And he just said this like amazing thing, which just today it almost tears me up too. He said, they have just set you free. And I was like, what are you talking about? Of course, with some swear words in that statement. And he's like, they've set you free. Like, you can do whatever you want now. Like, you're not on the checklist. Like, if you decide you want to stay and become a partner in 2 years, that's okay. But he's like, you kind of are done with like this program that you've had yourself on. And it's such a gift. He's like, they have set you free. And, it really, really sat with me. And I kept thinking about it in that frame too, of like, wow, like if this is freedom, what does freedom actually mean? And it was an amazing turning point for me personally, because I did a complete career pivot into tech, into startups, into building instead of, talking about companies. It really was an amazing kind of outcome.
Yeah, but I love that you share what a jarring experience it is at first, though, and that sometimes things are coming at you and feeling such a complex amount of emotions like we are in today. Other things that stir up a lot of emotions for me is as a business owner and being so public, as you are as well, sometimes getting and receiving feedback. Feedback is a lovely, beautiful thing, but not always joyful. And I would imagine with such a public platform like Nextdoor, that there is a lot of feedback, both amazing because it's an incredible product, but at times can't please everyone, is what I've learned the hard way.
Yeah.
And so as someone who deals with that on a regular basis, what advice or how have you navigated and managed that feedback? Because it's so easy to get kicked down, and woe is me, right? So that's why I love Brene Brown's quote. I don't know if you are a big Brene Brown fan like I am, but I love her "man in the arena" quote that she often states. It's not her quote, but the quote she likes to use. Yeah. So how about you?
Feedback for sure. There's a Hillary Clinton quote that I like, which is take feedback seriously, not personally. And I think if you kind of can keep that frame of reference all the time, like I tell my team all the time, feedback is a gift. So I do think that feedback is something that you have to kind of hear and go away and think about. Try not to react in the moment. If you don't understand, it's okay to ask understanding questions and maybe slightly more probing questions. But I think sometimes that also takes some of the heat and the emotion out of it. I mean, it depends what you're getting. If you're getting personal feedback, I definitely always tell people, to have your feedback session, probe and ask more questions to make sure you understand, but have a follow-up meeting where you go away, you think about it, and then you come back, because reacting in the moment emotionally is probably not the best outcome. And there's always like a gem, like the best feedback has just so much, like just so much truth to it, like you just know it. And as you get older in your career, frankly, you hear the same feedback over and over again. And for me, an unlock moment on feedback actually also came from that same mentor at Goldman. And she said, what's your feedback? Was as we were getting ready for this whole like run to becoming a partner. She was like, what's your feedback? And we kind of walked through it. She's like, what are you going to do about it? Sorry. And I started, of course, to go to the places where I had weakness, and I had like all these plans for how I was going to fix my weaknesses. And she's like, you just got this all wrong. You need to spend time on your strengths, or spikes, she called them. You need to have 2 or 3 things that you are world class in. It almost goes back to that whole ikigai thing of like, what are you really good at and what do you have passion on? And just be, I want to swear, but just be really, really awesome with those. And on the places that you're weak, you may be better off just like letting them go. Because at some stage, you're just beyond, like you're not beyond fixing, but be self-aware that these are true weaknesses. But think about shoring them up with things like your team. Like, how do you hire people into your team that are natural complements to the places that you have weakness? So, I think about it a lot. Like, one of the things I know I'm not very good at is, it's going to sound weird, having fun. I am like a doer, and I will work. And the minute I am like done with the big thing, like at that moment where people really want to celebrate, and they need to, like it's a huge part of team. Like my natural inclination is I really just often want to go home, curl up on the sofa, watch a cooking show with my daughter, and have a glass of wine with my husband and my son. And like, that's my natural inclination. The whole like going out to rah is really hard for me because I just have kind of moved on. And so as I think about, for example, my head of people at Nextdoor, Brian is such a great compliment to me, not because he's like a party animal, but because he's really good at remembering the deeply human part of how individuals need to have time to rest, recuperate, to celebrate. And he's really good at like reminding me, but because he knows me well, he does it in a way that's also very doable for me. So maybe instead of like the huge party, why don't we just go for like after work drinks with like a smaller team, because it can be much more personal. And he knows like I do better in that situation. So that's kind of one part of feedback. I mean, the other place you went to is not personal feedback, but when you're getting product feedback, believe me, in Nextdoor, we get feedback every day because even when I'm in my Nextdoor channel, I see people talking all the time. And sometimes I helpfully try to help and I get told, no, that's not what Nextdoor is for. I'm like, okay, good to know. Because I don't want to blurt out, well, actually, I'm a big part of helping run it. But so, and it can be really hurtful. Like, back to Hillary Clinton's quote, it does feel very personal because people are calling this thing that you've put your life and soul into kind of ugly in some way. Or to me, what gets more hurtful is when, and I find this particularly when we work with the press, right, where they insinuate that we have bad intention. And I think that hurts because it gets to the core of a value that's deeply important to me, that we have deep integrity and that we are always trusted. And so if we do something wrong, it's never with malintent. It's totally, yeah, we messed up and we want to accept that mess up, but like give us the benefit of the doubt. And I think that's sometimes where, particularly I think press can move fast to a place of like, that somehow it was meant, and that's where I get really kind of riled up and my team has to kind of calm me down. And so I think in that case, it's, look for the essence. Where is the truth in the feedback? Because there is always goodness in that feedback. And then, trying to walk in other people's shoes as much as you can. How do you develop your empathy gene? Whether it's spending time with your customers, getting really, that people are critiquing you most, how do you get to spend time with them? So you start to recognize them as humans, not just as feedback outputs. And then going back to that, it's kind of the deep essence of Nextdoor, that it's really hard to hate in person. So when you start putting real faces to, a platform or to a product or to a company, people start to give you more benefit of the doubt because, they accept that you are trying your best to do what's right for them. Now, it does mean you can't just live off that forever, because if nothing ever changes, then they're right, because it turns out you're actually not earning trust. So you do need to make sure that change is coming too as that feedback is given.
Yeah, such important advice. And I love that you shared one of your weaknesses. That is also one of my weaknesses. I knew I liked you for a reason. So much so that it was confusing when great things were happening. And instead of feeling like this sense of joy and thrill, I felt very flat, even to the point where I called it big moment hangovers. Because it was so confusing, because I assumed I was the only one who wasn't feeling this crazy emotion that everyone else was feeling. So I appreciate you sharing that. I'm wondering if you can share one of your strengths or something that helped you to be successful.
Yeah, and actually, as a closing note on that, one person actually said to me at one stage, the highs get lower and the lows get lower. And I was like, oh my God, you need to like do something different. Let's see, a strength. I think a couple of things that have always stood me well in life. Like, one is definitely, I am a people person. I really enjoy getting up close and personal. I think there's tremendous power in proximity. And I think that makes me authentic. I hope certainly makes me authentic when I deal with people and talk with people. And so the more that I am able to lean into that and not be too polished, like sometimes my team wants me to be more polished or professional, and it's kind of in the end just not who I am. So I think the strength of that people gene combined with kind of that authentic gene, you're just going to have to take it as it is. So I think that's kind of one thing. I think second, I'm definitely very high on the communication side of things. So, and I think that's really important in the job I'm in today, because you just can never underestimate how much you need to communicate things. Like when you're finally sick of saying something, people are finally hearing it probably for the first time. And I think so many CEOs that I deal with, like they've moved on. They're like, but I told everyone. Like, what are you talking about? I sent an email about it last week, or, I put that out on the Slack channel or whatever it is. And I'm like, no. And they're like, on all channels? I'm like, yes. And then you have to go talk to people live so that they actually make sure that they've heard you. But I think I'm definitely an over communicator. It's a huge strength, and like everyone's strengths in excess, it's my biggest weakness too, because I do love to let it all out there. And sometimes, for my team, it can be overwhelming. It's almost like they hear too much. Like I write a weekly, I call it love letter to my team, but email to my team on Saturdays. a huge part of it is it's my brain cleanse for the weekend. It's like, what happened this week? What really stood out to me? What's top of mind? But sometimes it's a lot to take in when you've just worked a whole week and now your CEO is sending you an email to read on a Saturday. But I think it's largely positive, and I just need to be careful of when it's getting to be a bit much.
Yeah, we talk a lot about strength and shadows here at Rise, so I appreciate you bringing that up. And this whole idea of over communication and communication. My business partner Kate, who was on earlier, she is a master communicator, and so I have learned so much because I was a math teacher, so communication and framing and PR and all that stuff, it's been a journey. But having Kate in my corner and as one of my 5 has really shaped and helped me to grow as a human in many ways. And so I love ending interviews the same way we began, with our favorite quote, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with," by Jim Rohn. And so I'm curious, who, you don't have to name all 5, we don't have time for that, but who's someone that stands out and how have they shaped or changed your view on things?
Sure. And first of all, Kate has done a great job because you're an amazing communicator. So thumbs up on that. If I did a speed round, definitely my mom and dad, but particularly my dad was a huge kind of icon for me when I was growing up because of that ingraining of the importance of community. I think during my early career, Mary Meeker, who many of you will know, kind of just doyen of Wall Street, but now an amazing investor in her own right, does a lot of early stage through late stage investing. Mary sits on my board now at Nextdoor because that was one of my first moves, is get the people that matter to you most in the position where they're going to have the most influence on you. And like, seriously, every morning I wake up right now, I think I have like 3 or 4 texts from Mary because she is a mass communicator too. The third person that I would mention is John Hope Bryant. He's a little bit of a newer influencer in my life. I probably met John 2 years ago. He does many things, but he runs an organization in Atlanta called Operation Hope. And I kind of came across John because I was so intrigued with what he was doing around helping lift credit scores in predominantly African-American communities, but particularly teaching about financial literacy and then ultimately into areas like small business creation. And I just so enjoyed John because he just has this zeal. Like, he has a flame that is alive in him. And when you meet him, first of all, you leave so energized. He has just this amazing art of making you feel special and you feel like you can do anything. And I just think if I can like steal a little of his thunder to kind of inject to everyone, even just listening on this webinar right now, like, you have it in you. We all have your back, like man oh man, particularly like women helping women. And these are incredible tough times. And so I'm here for you. I love that Rise is here for you. I love that we're doing series like this. And if you take anything out of just this lunch, it's, that little healthy dose of inspiration and just knowing that you leave a call with everyone kind of right there behind you doing what they can do.
Well, speaking of another organization helping women and awesome inspiration hours and lunch hours, Ladies Who Launch, which is something you co-founded. I just saw on Facebook recently that they're putting on great programming too. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to plug that before we jump off the call.
Sure. Yeah, it's the feature, not a bug. Like, what can we do in this moment? So one of the things we struggle with Ladies Who Launch, which is how you and I met, in fact, is how can we take an event series and scale it? Because events are hard to do, as you know. They're big uplift. We kind of were doing it more as a side hustle. So frankly, 1 to max 2 a quarter is our limit. And suddenly what we're finding in the midst of all of this is, wow, can we do this lunch with Ladies Who Launch? Yes, it is a pun, and do something a lot more scalable. So it's giving us a chance to experiment where I don't think we would have done it in 2020. I think it would have been something we came to in 2021, 2022. And so our roadmap is just getting resequenced. Yeah. But I'm excited to do it. And, to the lunch we did last week was with Helen Russell. So we heard from someone in the QSR industry. We just did one yesterday on retail with Joanna Griffith, who founded Nix, which is an amazing company if you don't know it. And I'm trying to get one pulled together right now around financing, and in particular, a couple of folks who are really kind of deep into small business financing, just to help people think through cash flow.
Yeah, so if someone was interested, where could they check that out so they can jump on too?
Yeah, so ladieswholaunch.org. Go check it out. We have a whole bunch of resources around COVID-19, and you'll see there the webinar series and when the next one is coming.
Well, thank you, Sarah. It's been such a joy to catch up. I really appreciate your time, and you inspire me every time I talk to you.
Always so good to see you too. Thanks a million.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.